You are born into a world of about 30 people. You know every face. You learned them before you learned to walk. The old woman who hums while she works. The man with the scar across his knuckles. The children you were raised beside, who feel less like neighbors and more like the walls of the only home you have ever known. This is your entire world. A few dozen people, moving together across a landscape, sleeping under the same sky, eating from the same fire. And here is the problem nobody talks about. In a group this small, almost everyone is your relative. Your cousins, your second cousins. The people you grew up beside are, by blood, far too close to ever start a family with. So when your body is ready to have children of your own, you face a quiet crisis that every single human who ever lived had to solve. Who do you have a child with? For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors lived in bands this small. Not villages, not towns, bands. A few dozen people at most. And mathematically, a group that tiny, breeding only within itself, should have been a death sentence. Let me explain why. Every person carries hidden errors in their DNA. Tiny broken instructions scattered through the genetic code that usually do no harm. They stay silent because you carry 2 copies of every gene, one from each parent, and a working copy quietly covers for a broken one. You never even know the broken copy is there. But when 2 close relatives have a child, something changes. Relatives carry the same hidden errors because they inherited them from the same ancestors. And when both parents pass down the same broken copy, there is no working version left to cover for it. The error switches on. Geneticists call this inbreeding depression. In plain terms, it means more illness, more infant death, weaker bodies, fewer children who live to grow up. Do this for a few generations in a closed group, and the group simply fades out of existence. So how did your ancestors avoid it? How did people living in bands of 30, scattered thinly across continents, with no maps, no writing, and no concept of genetics, manage to keep their bloodlines healthy for 10,000 generations? The answer is one of the most beautiful pieces of detective work in all of archaeology. And it starts with a grave in Russia. About 34,000 years ago, in a place we now call Sunghir, near the modern city of Vladimir, a small group of Ice Age hunters buried their dead with breathtaking care. 2 of these burials hold children, laid head to head, covered in thousands of carved mammoth ivory beads. Someone spent months making those beads. This was not a careless burial. These people mattered. For decades, the obvious assumption was that people buried together this lavishly must have been a family. Parents and children. A bloodline resting together. Then, in 2017, a team led by the geneticist S.K. Willerslev and the researcher Martin Sikora did something the original mourners could never have imagined. They read the ancient DNA still locked inside those bones, and the result stunned them. The people buried side by side at Sunghir were not close relatives. Think about what that means. In a community small enough to bury its dead together, the individuals were no more related than distant acquaintances, which is impossible by accident. In a truly isolated band of 30, everyone would share close blood. The only way to get a group of unrelated people is if those people came from somewhere else. If they were marrying outward, if bands were deliberately swapping members across the landscape. The Sunghir DNA showed your ancestors were already running a system to avoid inbreeding 34,000 years ago. Not by instinct alone, by structure. And we know what that structure looked like, because we can see the opposite of it. We can see what happens when a group fails to do this. Travel to a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, to a single toe bone from a Neanderthal woman who lived around 50,000 years ago. In 2014, the geneticist Svante Pääbo and his colleague Kay Prüfer sequenced her entire genome. And buried in that code was a quiet tragedy. Her DNA carried long stretches where both copies of her genes were nearly identical. Geneticists call these runs of homozygosity, which simply means long, unbroken regions where the genetic instructions from mother and father match almost perfectly. That only happens one way. Her parents were close relatives, as close as half-siblings, or an uncle and niece, and she was not unusual. Across the Neanderthal genomes we have recovered, The signs point to small, isolated, inbred populations, bands that could not reach far enough to find new blood. Their world was too sparse, their numbers too thin, their networks too broken. Neanderthals did not vanish because they were stupid. They had big brains, made tools, controlled fire, cared for their sick. But their population stayed small and fragmented, and a small fragmented population is fragile. When the climate lurched, when food failed, there was no wider web to fall back on. Your ancestors had that web. The Neanderthals, it seems, did not. So how big did that web have to be? How many people does a group actually need to stay healthy across the centuries? In the 20th century, the anthropologist Joseph Birdsell studied Aboriginal Australian populations and noticed something he called magic numbers. Bands tended to settle around 25 people. The basic camp, the fire you sleep beside. But those bands were not alone. Roughly 20 of them, around 500 people in total, formed a larger connected network. A web of bands who spoke the same language, knew each other, gathered together, and crucially, married across the lines that divided them. 25 to live with, 500 to survive with. That second number is the secret. 500 Pressful is large enough to keep a population genetically healthy across generations, small enough that, spread thinly across a vast territory, it can still feed itself. Your ancestors were not living in isolated pockets of 30. They were nodes in a sprawling network, threaded together by deliberate human design, and the thread that held it together was marriage. This is where a French thinker named Claude Lévi-Strauss enters the story. In 1949, he proposed something that sounds simple, but reshapes everything. He argued that the incest taboo, the near-universal human rule against having children with close kin, was never really about disgust, and not even mainly about biology. It was about exchange. Here is his logic. If a rule forbids you from pairing off with your own close relatives, then you are forced to look outward. You must find a partner in another band, and to do that, your group has to build a relationship with that other group. A bond, an alliance. Every marriage in this view was a treaty. When your sister joins a band 3 valleys over, those people are now your relatives too. You will share food with them in lean years. You will shelter with them when the herds move. You will fight beside them, or at least not fight against them. The taboo against marrying close kin did not just protect your DNA. It stitched scattered bands into a single fabric of survival. So, let us reconstruct a day when that fabric was woven. It is late summer, thousands of years ago. The season when food is abundant has drawn many bands together at a gathering place. Maybe a river crossing, maybe a valley where the herds pass through. For most of the year, your band of 30 moved alone, but now there are hundreds of people here. Fires everywhere. Faces you have never seen. You are young, your body is ready, and for the first time in your life, you are surrounded by people who are not your cousins. There is dancing. There is trading. The elders are talking quietly, arranging things, weighing alliances, remembering old debts and old kindnesses, and somewhere across the firelight is a person from a distant band, a stranger, someone whose face does not belong to the walls of your childhood. This gathering is not a party. It is the most important survival technology your species ever invented. It is the moment the web gets restitched. New partnerships form, new blood flows between bands. New alliances are sealed that might, years from now, be the only reason you do not starve. And then the season ends, and the bands scatter back across the land. But the threads remain, carried in marriages, carried in shared children, carried in a debt of hospitality that can be called in when the snow comes. We can still watch this system working today. Among the Juhowansi people of the Kalahari, sometimes called the Kung, the anthropologist Polly Wiesner documented a practice called Exaro. It is a network of gift exchange, partnerships maintained across enormous distances where people give and receive carefully over the course of years. On the surface, it looks like trading ornaments. But what Hexaro really does is keep relationships alive between far-flung groups, so that when one area's water dries up, its people have somewhere to go. The anthropologist Richard Lee, studying the same people, found that marriage almost always meant marrying outward, into another band, knitting the network tighter with every union. These living examples show you something the bones can only hint at. The system was never just about who you had children with. It was about weaving a safety net out of human relationships, large enough that no single band ever truly stood alone. And here is the twist that turns the whole story inside out. You probably assumed that avoiding inbreeding was the goal, and that everything else, the gatherings, the alliances, the gift networks, were just the method. But look closer and the truth may be the reverse. The genetic health was almost a side effect. The deeper engine was connection. By making it a rule that you had to look outward for a partner, your ancestors forced every band into permanent, living relationships with its neighbors. The incest taboo was the rule that quietly built the entire human social world: trade, language sharing, alliance. The vast cooperative web that let a fragile, slow, clawless primate spread across every continent on Earth. In 2011, the anthropologists Kim Hill and Robert Walkers studied who actually lives together in hunter-gatherer camps, and they found something that sets humans apart from almost every other primate. Our camps are full of unrelated people, friends, in-laws. People bound not only by blood but by choice and alliance. No other ape lives like this. The thing that makes human society human. That side circle of cooperation that runs far beyond your own kin may have grown from the simple ancient demand to find a partner outside your own band. So the rule that began as a way to keep your bloodline healthy ended up building civilization itself. Now, let that reflect back onto your own life. You live in a world of millions. You can speak to a stranger on the other side of the planet in seconds. By every measure, your social world is unimaginably larger than your ancestors' band of 30. And yet, a strange number of people today feel something your ancestors almost never did. They feel alone. Surrounded by faces, connected to no one. Your ancestors never separated connection from survival. The web of relationships was the food supply. It was the shelter. It was the marriage, the gift, the alliance, all the same single fabric. To be woven into other people was simply what it meant to be alive. Connection was not a luxury you scheduled around your work. Connection was the work. You carry the result of that web inside you. Your DNA is healthy because, for 300,000 years, people you will never know chose to look outward, to cross the firelight, to marry the stranger, to turn a distant band into family. Every one of those choices is a thread, and you are the place where 10,000 generations of threads finally tie together. You are born into a world of about 30 people. But you were never meant to stay there. You were built, from the very beginning, to reach beyond the only world you knew, and to find your family in the faces you had not yet met.